I still remember the sound of the pawn shop door closing behind me. The little bell chimed like it was mocking me. That day, I sold the last pieces of gold my husband had given me. My bangles, my earrings, even the thin chain that used to rest against my heart. I told myself it was for a reason bigger than pride. For my son, for his dream. For the boy who used to hold my hand at the market and promise me he'd buy me the world one day. But what would you have done in my place? When your child looks at you with eyes full of hope and says, "Ma, just this once, help me. I'll make you proud." You'd sell your soul, wouldn't you? I did. And for a while I thought it was worth it. The money from that gold paid for his tuition, his rent, his chance to build a life I never had. Every call from him filled me with warmth. He'd tell me about the city lights, the new people, the opportunities, his voice full of life. I'd sit by the small window in our old house, the one that let in a sliver of sunset, and smile. I believed I was part of his success, even if it meant I wore nothing but glass bangles now. But slowly, those calls grew shorter. The warmth faded. He was busy. Too busy to talk. Too busy to visit. At first, I made excuses for him. That's what mothers do, right? We defend our children even against our own heartbreak. He's working hard, I'd tell my sister when she asked why he never called. You know how the city is. But deep down, I knew. His new world didn't have space for me. It had shining buildings, rich friends, parties with laughter like wind chimes. What place does an old woman with worn hands have in that world? Still, I waited. Birthdays passed, festivals too. I kept his favorite sweets ready each time, just in case he walked through the door. He never did. The first real crack appeared when I called him one night after hearing about a storm near his city. The line rang, and when he finally answered, there was noise in the background. Music, laughter, voices calling his name. I asked if he was safe, and he sighed, "Ma, I'm fine. I'm with friends. Don't worry so much." His tone. It wasn't unkind, but it was distant, like I was a reminder he didn't need. I hung up and stared at the quiet room. The storm outside felt calmer than the one inside. Months later, I received a photo on my phone. He was standing beside a new car, smiling, wearing a watch that probably cost more than everything I owned. He captioned it, "Dreams do come true." I wanted to comment, "Yes, they do, my son. I sold mine so yours could." But I didn't. Instead, I whispered congratulations to the empty room. Sometimes silence is the only applause a mother has left. You'd think pain dulls with time, but it sharpens when mixed with betrayal. The day I learned the truth, it felt like someone had driven a nail through my chest. A neighbor's daughter had gone to the city for college and happened to meet my son at an event. When she came back, she showed me a picture of him on social media, standing with a woman, laughing. The caption read, "Proud of my new family." I blinked. Family? I hadn't even known he was married. No call, no invitation, nothing. Just a picture on a stranger's phone. For days, I couldn't eat. I kept replaying memories, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I'd loved him too much. Maybe I'd been too easy to forget. My husband had always warned me, don't give everything to anyone, not even your own blood. But how do you measure love? How do you hold it back? A mother doesn't love halfway. She gives until there's nothing left. Weeks later, a small envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a photo of my son and his wife, smiling, with a note, "Sorry, Ma, it all happened fast. We'll visit soon." The handwriting was rushed, like guilt scribbled it, not love. I waited. Again. Days turned into months. No visit, no call. The sweets I'd made for them dried up and crumbled to dust in the tin box. That's when I started hearing rumors. A friend from my old neighborhood told me my son was working for a wealthy businessman. one who had a reputation for using people and discarding them. "Your boy's doing well," she said, "but he's changed." I smiled and said, "Change is good." But inside, I wondered, change into what? The next time I saw him was almost by accident. I had gone to the city to visit a distant cousin in the hospital. As I waited for a bus, a sleek car stopped at the traffic light nearby. Through the window, I saw him. My son. He looked even sharper than in his photos. Clean suit, perfect hair, confidence dripping from his smile. But it wasn't the look that broke me. It was the way he looked past me, like I was invisible. I called his name once, softly, afraid I'd embarrass him. The light turned green. He didn't even glance my way. That night, I sat on my small bed staring at the empty wall where his childhood photos used to hang. I had taken them down earlier that year, telling myself it was for cleaning. But maybe I just couldn't bear their silence anymore. And as I stared, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a deep, hollow ache that whispered, "You gave everything. Now take back something you forgot." I started paying attention to the world he lived in. The news, the company he worked for, the people he surrounded himself with. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity, but it was more than that. I needed to understand what had replaced me, who had taken my son's heart, or maybe what had. One night, I found their company website. There he was, in the team photo, assistant director of marketing. I stared at the smiling faces beside him. One of them, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a smug grin, caught my attention. The company founder. The kind of man who built empires on loyalty and crushed those who showed weakness. Something about that photo told me my son wasn't safe, even in his success. Would you have felt the same? That mix of fear and bitter satisfaction, knowing the world that took him away might someday hurt him back? I didn't plan revenge that night. I planned protection. But revenge has a strange way of finding mothers. It sneaks in through love's open wounds. Over the next few weeks, I gathered small pieces of information. Who he worked with, where he lived, what circles he moved in. It wasn't hard. People in cities talk more than they listen, especially if you play the part of a harmless, curious old lady. I found he lived in a luxury apartment, paid for partly by his company. He often hosted gatherings for clients, parties with expensive wine and shallow laughter. I also learned that he'd taken a loan under his name, a big one. That detail stayed in my mind, quietly waiting for its purpose. I didn't contact him yet. I wasn't ready. My heart still fought between love and disappointment. I prayed every night, asking God to guide him back. But when prayers go unanswered long enough, even faith starts sounding like silence. That's when I realized some lessons can't be taught by love alone. The turning point came one evening when I got a call from an unknown number. It was his wife. Her voice trembled as she said, "Auntie, please don't tell him I called, but I need help. He's changed. He drinks, he fights, he's in trouble with his boss." My chest tightened. The image of my perfect son cracked. I asked what happened, but before she could say more, the line went dead. I called back. No answer. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was afraid. Afraid that the same success that blinded him might destroy him. And that fear, that's where my revenge began. Because I realized he needed to fall to see what he'd become. What would you have done? Watch from afar while your child drowned in his own pride? Or step in and teach him the value of what he lost? That night, as rain tapped against my window, I opened the small box where I kept my husband's old letters and my son's childhood drawings. Between them lay a single gold coin, the only piece I hadn't sold. I held it tight and whispered, "You took everything I gave. Now I'll take back the lesson you forgot." Rain still tapping the window. I sat there with that single gold coin like it was a detonator for everything I'd held inside for years. I didn't have a plan that night, not a detailed one, only a cold, steady certainty that something had to change. The next morning, I woke with the small coin in my palm and a map forming in my head, not of violence or malice, but of exposure and consequence. If he had traded our lives for a glitter he no longer needed, then I would reclaim the currency of his conscience. I would remind him what he sold when he sold my love. I began small and clumsy, the way anyone who hasn't been schooled in revenge begins, with fears, stumbles, and little lies that felt like truths. I reread old messages, the ones where he thanked me for waking up early to pack his lunch, the ones he promised to call. I wrote nothing down at first. Instead, I watched. I watched his patterns, the times he posted, the places tagged, the people who liked his photos. I listened when neighbors gossiped about the company dinners and the name of the businessman who'd taken him under his wing. Every piece of gossip was a thread. You might think it's petty, but when you're dealing with someone who's forgotten you, those petty things are scaffolding. They build the story you need. I started visiting the places he frequented, but not like a spy. I went as the harmless auntie who happened to be in the city for a doctor's appointment, the woman who wanted a cup of tea at the cafe where he once laughed with his friends. I let my presence be ordinary, and ordinary gets remembered less, except by those who watch for patterns. One waiter recognized him from a month before and mentioned a name. A florist remembered delivering a bouquet to the office 2 weeks ago. Each small memory led to another, and slowly the map gained roads. There were risks I didn't want to ignore. The first was my own conscience. Often I would sit on my bed at night and replay the image of him standing beside that new car, the caption flashing through my head like an insult. I would ask myself, is this who I should become? Revenge doesn't sit well with a mother's heart. Yet what I felt wasn't only revenge, it was a righteous hunger to correct an imbalance. If he could walk away from the hands that pulled him up, then he needed to feel the absence of that scaffold. Not to break him beyond repair, but to make him see the worth of what he had before it was gone. The second risk was practical. He had money now, people who would defend him, maybe even lawyers. I had a small pension and years of living modestly. So I refined the plan to require cunning, not cash. I would use what mothers are best at: patience, observation, and the ability to be underestimated. People assume old women are harmless. They speak louder when they think the listener cannot act. One rainy afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. His wife, the woman whose picture had once arrived in a stranger's phone, disappeared from social media for a few days. Then a neighbor's daughter returned from the city with gossip like a bouquet of wilting flowers. "She's pregnant," the girl whispered, eyes wide. "But they're arguing. He's not there for her. There was a fight at the office, something to do with money." That single rumor was a fuse. It told me that the shiny world had cracks. It told me that success doesn't always come with wisdom. I called the number I had for the wife. My hands trembled the first time I dialed, as if the phone itself might reject me. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was raw, like someone who had been trying to hold a storm inside her chest. She said, "Please don't tell him I called," as if she already assumed I would. I didn't mean to. I don't want anyone to know how bad it is. Her words were a lantern in the dark. I asked gently, and she stumbled into details. Fights, drinking, pressure from work, the founder's temper. She painted a picture of a man who was losing himself. We spoke for hours over days, not always talking about my son, but about her fears. At first, I didn't use what she told me as weapons. I shared recipes, old stories of the village,
the name of the river where I'd once washed my wedding sari. She seemed comforted by the familiarity, and when she trusted me, she let slip the moments that cut my son deeper than I had been cut. Promises broken, apologies given and evaporated, and one evening where he had walked out of their tiny apartment after a fight and not come back for 12 hours. I could have gone to his office then, stormed into a meeting, and accused him in front of colleagues. That would have been satisfying, but destructive in the worst way. I wanted a correction that taught, not ruined. You ever wonder how far you'd go to make someone see what they threw away? Be honest. Would you wait out the slow ache, or would you take the first hit to wake the sleeper? I elected to be surgical. I started planting small reminders of his roots where he could see them. A cousin of mine runs a little textile stall in the market near his office. I paid her a visit and bought a handful of small, traditional trinkets. A cheap locket, a bright thread, a photograph of his father that someone had kept. Nothing gold, nothing valuable. I wanted memory, not money. One evening, I arranged for one of those trinkets to be delivered to his office with a note, "For when you forget where you came from." I didn't expect fireworks. The card was flimsy. The act was quiet, but the ripple from a small stone can reach far shores. He posted a photo of the locket the next day with a careless caption. People commented, colleagues laughed. Even the founder sent a smiling emoji. It looked harmless, but the point was made. He had been confronted with a memory and reacted with indifference. I felt nothing and everything at once. There were nights I succumbed to simpler, more desperate thoughts. I would imagine calling his boss and telling the truth about the loans, about the man he worked for. I'd imagine exposing those shiny smiles in public. But I resisted, because I knew that public ruin is a blunt instrument, and I wanted nuance. I wanted him to recognize loss through what he loved, status, respect, and the illusion of control. If those could be unsettled by truth and consequence, he might stand in the ruin and understand how he had helped make it. So I moved to the loan. You remember I'd learned he had taken a large one. Loans are like promises written in numbers. They can be negotiated, they can be defaulted upon, and they create pressure that even swagger can mask. I began to casually mention, to people who might cross his path, a clinic receptionist, a postman, a vendor near his office, little rumors about corporate cutbacks, about the founder's risky ventures. I never lied. Rumor is not the same as slander. I was careful, but people talk, and talk becomes a current. At this stage, the plan was less about a single blow and more about constructing a mirror where he would one day stand and meet himself. I wanted him to look and see the person who had walked past his mother on the street without blinking. And I wanted the mirror to crack in front of people whose opinions he valued. That way, the lesson would not be only mine, but his own. There were close calls. Once, a generous neighbor saw me outside his office and asked if I was waiting for someone. I lied and said I'd come for a meeting, that I was there to sort out an insurance policy. The neighbor's brow lifted in confusion, but she left it at that. The founder's driver once asked if I was a relative, and I smiled and said I was an aunt who liked to visit the city. He pointed out the wrong apartment floor to me, and I walked away with my heart pounding. Each near discovery hardened me. Each time I managed the facade, I felt the scales of power inching back towards me.
There were nights when doubt whispered in my ear. Are you teaching him a lesson or feeding a bitterness that will consume you? A friend would make tea and tell me to let it go, to focus on the little joys of life rather than orchestrating a confrontation. I would hum and nod, but the coin in my drawer had a heat to it that matched my pulse. Every day I had to decide to be the woman who waited quietly, swallowed by neglect, or the woman who put herself together and demanded an accounting.
The answer felt inevitable. The momentum came from an unexpected ally, his own pride. Pride is a brittle thing. When it starts to crack, it amplifies the smallest pebbles into avalanches. I planted a rumor at a small gathering about a big client who had been disappointed with the company's decorum. It wasn't direct, but it was enough to set off a chain reaction. Emails started circulating about tightening budgets. Whispers about performance reviews found their way into lunchrooms. I hadn't engineered a scandal. I nudged a system toward its natural wobble. People who thrive on appearances wobble first. That strategy forced my son into action. He started calling more, shorter and sharper this time, not with affection, but with irritation. "Ma, don't interfere," he snapped on the phone one night, his voice brittle. I listened to the edge in it and felt a small, private triumph. He had noticed disturbance in his waters. If he had been comfortable, he would have ignored me. If he had been indifferent, he would have continued his silence. He was rattled, and that rattling was proof the plan worked. But the plan needed to be careful not to break him beyond repair. This is where empathy and revenge braided in an odd and secret way. I still worried about his wife's pregnancy, about the possibility of a child depending on the man I knew. The goal had never been to destroy a life, it was to restore a conscience. I made sure the steps I took would give him chances to correct his course. A moment to call home. A friend nudged to remind him of his mother's calls. A cryptic note left where he'd see it. Each intervention was calibrated to shock without annihilating. The most daring move came on a dull Tuesday when the office had arranged a client dinner. I found a way, not to go in, that would have been bold and reckless, but to place a small, tangible reminder at the venue. A pressed card from the kindergarten where he had made a crude painting for me, mounted on a table with a single line. "Remember who raised you." It was childish, perhaps, petty, but it was public. It would humiliate him among the people whose approval he craved, yes, but it would also make him face the fact that his past had not been erased. That night, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. A single voice note from him. I played it with hands that trembled. He sounded shaken, almost wounded. "Ma, someone left something at the table. I don't know who would do this." There was guilt layered under the confusion. I could have replied then with triumph, but I did not. Instead, I sent a simple message. "Come home." It was the only truthful thing left to say. What followed were days of jittery interactions. A text asking if I was okay. A phone call in the early hours asking about childhood stories. He was probing the border of recognition, seeing if the place he left behind still existed. The warmth in those questions made my heart ache. But the change I wanted couldn't be merely nostalgic. It had to be honest. He needed to understand the cost he had paid and the person who had paid it. Part of me still wondered if this was cruel, if I was forcing him to feel pain I had been carrying quietly for years. But I thought of the afternoons when I'd nursed him through fevers, the small hands that once clung to my finger, the nights of work where I sewed and saved. If he could forget such things for the glitter of a watch and empty praise, then a shock might be the only medicine left. So I kept building, patient and precise, like someone assembling a stove out of parts. Each small reminder, each whispered rumor, each public nudge was not random cruelty, but a lesson plotted on a map. Inconvenience his comforts, expose the fragility of his status, and give him opportunities to repair what he broke. Every time I held back from cruelty, I felt stronger. Revenge, when administered with restraint and conscience, can be restorative. It can force someone to look at their hands and ask where they dropped what they once held dear. And so part 2 of my life's quiet campaign closed with a new rhythm: observation, nudging, and small, precise exposures. I slept less, watched more, and learned to wear patience like armor. The coin in my drawer had lost its warmth. It had become a symbol now, not of hope, but of promise. I had started the steps that could topple vanity and bring him back to the table where he belonged, not to shame him forever, but to make him understand the price of being forgetful. There were risks ahead, of being discovered, of being seen as vindictive, but there was also a narrowing path towards something I'd been denied for too long: recognition, accountability, and perhaps eventually reconciliation. Would you have done the same? Would you have waited for him to crumble under his own glory? Or would you have warned him, begged him, saved him from himself without the theater? Be honest. The line between love and vengeance is thinner than most of us admit. I chose a path that walked that line, because sometimes, to save a person you love from their worst self, you must first show them the ruins of what they chose over you. Days passed after that last message. Come home. I didn't know if he would. I'd said those 2 words with all the strength I had left, and they hung in the air like a prayer. The coin in my drawer had gone cold. Even the air in my room felt heavy with waiting. I didn't light the lamp that evening. I wanted to see if he'd remember the way home in the dark. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard a car stop outside. At first I thought it was a neighbor's visitor, but then I heard the hesitant crunch of shoes on gravel. My heart stopped. He was here. When he knocked, it wasn't confident or hurried. It was soft, almost guilty. The door creaked open, and there he stood, my son. Older, thinner, eyes shadowed by more than exhaustion. For a moment, we just looked at each other. No words, no explanations, just years of silence pressed into one fragile moment. He stepped inside slowly, like he was entering a sacred place. His suit was crumpled, his tie loose, his expression somewhere between pride and shame. He opened his mouth, but the first thing that came out wasn't an apology. It was a question. Why, Ma? Why did you do all this? It wasn't anger in his voice. It was confusion, fear, the kind a man feels when the ground under his feet finally tells him it's been cracking all along. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the small wooden box where I'd kept the gold coin, opened it, and placed it on the table between us. This, I said softly, is all that's left of your father's memory, of my sacrifices, and of us.
He stared at it like it was glowing, like it burned his eyes. I saw tears rise and vanish before they could fall. He looked around the room, the peeling paint, the old sofa, the empty photo frames. "You shouldn't live like this," he whispered. "You should have told me." I smiled. "I did, many times. You just stopped listening." He sank into the chair opposite mine. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked between us like a heartbeat that refused to die. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. "I thought I was doing everything right, that if I succeeded, you'd be proud. I was proud, until your success made you forget why you started." He covered his face with his hands. For the first time since he was a child, he wept, not loudly, but with the quiet grief of someone seeing their own reflection for the first time. I let him cry. I didn't reach out immediately. Sometimes, love needs space to echo before it can be heard. When he calmed, I spoke gently. "Do you remember when you were 10 and you broke your father's watch trying to fix it?" He nodded, eyes still wet. "You said, 'I only wanted to make it better.' And your father told you, 'Sometimes you break things by trying to make them perfect.'" He looked up then,
realization dawning. "And that's what I did to us," he murmured. I nodded. "You can fix a watch, but time you waste on pride, you can't get it back." The rain outside softened into mist. The house smelled like wet soil and jasmine, the kind of night that feels like forgiveness. I poured him tea, just like I used to. The steam rose between us, blurring the years. He took a sip, hands trembling, and said, "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," I said. "But I didn't sell my gold for punishment. I sold it for your future. I only wanted you to remember who gave it to you." We talked through the night, about his mistakes, his wife, the child they were expecting. He confessed things I hadn't known, the debt, the pressure, the feeling that success had turned into a cage. The company he worked for was collapsing. The founder he admired had been exposed for fraud. He said he didn't know where to turn. "You turned to the world first, and it took everything from you. Maybe it's time you turn home." For the first time in years, he smiled through tears, the same crooked smile from when he was a boy trying to hide guilt after breaking a vase. "Can I stay here for a while?" he asked. "This will always be your home," I said, "but only if you help rebuild it." In the days that followed, he did. He called his wife, apologized, brought her home. She arrived a week later, timid, but kind, carrying their unborn child like a promise of something new. Together we cleaned the house, hung the photos again, replaced the cracked frames. The neighbors whispered, of course. Small towns always do. But their whispers faded under the sound of laughter that slowly returned to our home. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the porch, he handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold chain, simple, modest, but new. "It's not to replace what you sold, it's to remind me what it cost." I took it, tears pooling in my eyes. "Gold comes and goes," I whispered, "but love, when it returns, is worth more than anything you can wear." He smiled. "I'll never forget again, Ma." And for once, I believed him. Years later, when people ask about my son, I tell them he's doing well, not just in money, but in soul. He visits often, calls every Sunday, and when his daughter was born, he named her Asha, hope. Sometimes when she sits on my lap, playing with that same gold coin I once kept hidden, I think about how close I came to letting bitterness win. Revenge would have made me powerful for a moment, but forgiveness made me whole again. And if you ask me now, after everything, was it worth it? I'd say yes, because sometimes the hardest revenge is forgiveness, the kind that forces someone to face themselves and rebuild, not because you demanded it, but because they finally understand. What would you have done in my place? Would you have waited for love to find its way back, or would you have chased justice until there was nothing left to save? Either way, I've learned this much. When love forgets you, don't destroy it. Remind it of who you are. Because even the coldest heart remembers warmth when it's time to come home. And that's how a mother's pain became her greatest strength. Not through vengeance, but through love that refused to die. Sometimes life doesn't need grand revenge to set things right. It just needs one brave heart to forgive. Because when pride fades and silence breaks, love has a way of finding its voice again. Tell me, what would you have done in her place? Would you forgive, or would you let the pain speak for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for more stories that remind us, even after betrayal, hope always finds a way home.